Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this latest teaching session in the course on technology and the future of medicine. Today, Jack Tuszynski is going to take us through quantum biology part 1, and then on Thursday we'll have quantum biology part 2. And splitting the lecture like this was a suggestion of international peer review. So we're very proud of this decision to split the lecture. Without any further ado, Jack, take it away.
Thank you very much, Kevin. It's a great pleasure to be back here and to see more faces in the audience. And as Kim said, I actually recommend that you interrupt me whenever you feel there is something uncomfortable or you have questions or comments to make. I don't mind. In fact, the opposite is true. So as Kim said, there'll be 2 lectures on quantum biology. The first one today, I will start by presenting some basic ideas about quantum mechanics, quantum physics, quantum chemistry, quantum biochemistry, leading to quantum biology. And I don't know how many of you have any background in quantum physics. Maybe you can raise your hand if you've taken a course in quantum physics. Nobody? Okay, so we'll do a very gentle introduction to it. Don't be afraid to ask. All right, and on Thursday, actually, I'll take it one step beyond, and I'll try to discuss repercussions of quantum biology for quantum neuroscience, including consciousness, which is a topic that has been in the public domain for a couple decades now. But I think we're making some progress, and there is some reason to be optimistic that this issue will be resolved in our lifetime. So, this introduction to quantum biology will start with a historical perspective. I think it's the proper format for discussing quantum biology because, in my opinion at least, biology is undergoing a somewhat similar evolution to physics. Physics being the queen of sciences, if I may say so, being a physicist myself, has a very long history going back to the 1700s or even deeper into ancient Greece. But modern physics started with people like Newton and Galileo and Kepler and Hooke. Started actually with astronomy, but this sort of deterministic, mechanistic approach to physical phenomena persisted and has been very successful for hundreds of years. And it is based on something called the scientific method, which some people tend to ignore at their own peril. I think we still need to be cognizant of what the scientific method entails. And it really is not to prove something, but to rather disprove it. We start with a hypothesis. We look for empirical evidence for or against, but mainly against the hypothesis, so that we can revise it and bring it to the next level of sophistication. And this is exactly what happened with quantum physics. Quantum physics resulted not from some fancy ideas, but from empirical evidence that classical physics after 300 years of uninterrupted reign in terms of the human development and technological applications, finally started to burst at the seams, and there were very, very serious problems interpreting several phenomena. I'll describe these phenomena in a few minutes, but I want to say that that culminated with, in my humble opinion, probably the greatest burst of intellectual activity that this planet has ever seen at the beginning of 20th century. And this is a collection of individuals in this photo dated to 1927. Solvay conferences took place in Brussels, Belgium, in the Hotel Metropole, where the luminaries of physics and chemistry were gathered to discuss the revolutionary concepts of quantum mechanics that were permeating the scientific edifice of the time. And it may be too far away from you, but you can recognize some of these faces in this picture. People like Albert Einstein sitting centrally, and Marie Curie, and Schrödinger, and Pauli, and Planck, and Paul Dirac and others, pretty much everybody in this picture got a Nobel Prize. If not everybody, then probably 90%. So you see probably the greatest collection of Nobel Prize winners gathered in one place at the same time ever. And not for petty Nobel Prizes, as sometimes they awarded these days, but these were big Nobel Prizes for revolutionary, new paradigm kind of ideas. So what were these ideas? First, I'll give you the sort of basics, conceptual basis of it, and then we'll talk about why it came about and what was the reason for introducing these strange concepts into science of the day. So classical physics, as you may know, classical physics is very intuitive in a way because it discusses the behavior of objects, material objects with masses and sometimes charges, subjected to forces. So objects have very well identified positions and velocities, or momenta as we call in physics, the product of velocity and mass. And Newton, of course, made these incredible observations translated into mathematical language that are called Newton's laws of physics. And that is the foundation of quantum mechanics. Positions, velocities, and forces. An additional concept which is very important that you can also introduce into physics on this basis is the concept of energy, because energy is an indestructible quantity. It's so-called a conserved property, conserved quantity in physical systems. You cannot create energy, you cannot destroy energy, you can only transform energy from one place to another or from one object to another. Most of these concepts actually needed to be redefined in quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics does not talk about positions and momenta so much and objects having definite places or even the extent. In quantum mechanics, physical systems are replaced by mathematical representations called wave functions. So it's a little bit like moving away from the concept of a drop of fluid representing a physical object in classical mechanics to the concept of a cloud. It's a wave function. So physical objects in quantum mechanics are spread out, smeared out. They don't have really very well defined boundaries. They exist everywhere at the same time with different probabilities. So that's another departure, probability as a concept rather than knowledge or very well defined location or so position or velocity. These things had to be removed as a result of what you'll see in a minute. So this is based on 19th century mathematics. So physicists were very lucky that mathematicians developed the language useful for quantum mechanics, namely functional analysis, Hilbert spaces, and Hermitian operators. It's a lot of technical jargon, but just to give you an idea that this existed before physics needed it. And maybe this is an important philosophical observation in this day and age where everything has to be practical, everything has to be accounted for and predicted. When we write grant applications, as we do almost all the time, you have to predict not only what you will produce by your research, but when and how much of it in 3-month segments. I think it's a complete nonsense if you ask me, but maybe you don't have to ask me because I get upset when people ask me this question. So the greatest discovery of all science that we know of actually were never supported by research grants. Albert Einstein, for example, when he discovered special relativity and contributed to our knowledge of the universe in the most profound way, he didn't even have a faculty position, let alone a grant to support it. Okay, but that's just a distraction to keep you interested. So I talked about this cloudiness or the lack of deterministic approach to physical systems and quantum mechanics. This is another interesting thing is that although some objects in physics, like electrons and protons, elementary particles, or atoms, may appear to you to be solid, they are actually not. Physical experiments prove that they still have wavy nature. For example, electrons passing through double slits or diffraction grating, they produce images very much like photons, light, electromagnetic radiation. Therefore, depending on what kind of experiment you do, and a physical object may have a particle-like behavior or property, or a wave-like behavior or property, and vice versa. Waves like light, photons, behave also in a way akin to particles. And as I mentioned earlier, the language of physics changed from the language of predictability, which was very important, I guess, in terms of technological applications of physics in the 19th century, especially for the development of industries, engineering applications, construction of bridges, houses, and machinery, to a language of probability, lack of certainty about anything at all. And that has also profound philosophical implications for our perception of the universe as we know it. And an interesting observation, pun not intended, is that the observer in classical physics, the experimentalist, has no influence on the outcome of the experiment. In quantum mechanics, it's unavoidable. Whatever you do to measure some property of a physical system, you always interfere with it. Because even in the most subtle way, by, let's say, reflecting a single photon of electromagnetic radiation, light, off a surface, you disturb that surface. There is no possibility at all of making any measurements without disturbing the system that you measure. And I think that has some repercussions also philosophically to areas like psychology or psychiatry, where there isn't, or any other human science, I guess, or life science, because when we interrogate a system, be it a human or an animal, we have to somehow disturb its equilibrium. And that's really true about quantum mechanics. Even in the most extreme cases, you cannot avoid it. And finally, the name quantum mechanics conjures the image of quantization. And that's why quantum is introduced, but it's a little bit misleading in a way, because not always do we have quantization of energy levels. So what is really this term saying to us is that in classical mechanics, the energies of particles, let's say the energy of stored in an electric generators or battery or something like this, may have more or less arbitrary values, and it gets continuously depleted as you use it. In quantum mechanics, that is not possible. A quantum system has only discrete values of energies, and you can make transitions between very well specified energy levels called quantum levels, the lowest being the ground state. It's called the ground state level. So there is an energy bottom, there is no energy top, but there is discrete steps on the energy ladder, as we call it. All right? So that's why quantization, because it's quantized, not quantified, quantized. And this is probably one of the most bizarre consequences of quantum mechanics. It's not actually a consequence of experimental measurements, but it's actually a consequence of the quantum mechanics formulation, mathematical formulation. Everything consistently flows from experiments, but one conclusion that is inescapable is the so-called Heisenberg uncertainty principle. That means, unlike in classical physics, you cannot ever, no matter what you do, precisely know two so-called complementary properties of a given system. That is, in this particular case, you cannot precisely specify where an object is and how fast it's moving. These are mutually exclusive properties. You can know one precisely, but the other then completely imprecisely. Because the product of these two uncertainties, delta x, delta p, is always greater or at best equal to 1/2 of the Planck constant divided by 2 pi. Okay, that's a consequence of the mathematical properties of the objects, describing physical properties. So position and momentum are two so-called complementary quantities. Another pair of complementary quantities is angular momentum and angle. So you cannot know how rapidly, for example, a top is spinning, and at the same time what angle is at. Or energy and time. These are also, you cannot know precisely the energy of a system and when the system was at this energy level. Because if you were to determine the energy level, you disturb it, and at the moment you determine it, you actually move it out of that position by delivering some energy to it. Okay, so this is a little bit bizarre. You have to change your way of thinking in a major way. I don't advocate that you do it right this moment. It takes some time to get used to it. When I do teach quantum physics, when I used to do it, I'm now in medicine, so I don't teach quantum physics anymore. But when I do that, I always say to my students that they should actually stop obsessing about the philosophical ramifications and the interpretation. They should just learn the math and learn how to solve problems in quantum mechanics. It's not very satisfying, but it's a practical approach. Okay, so this was the philosophical background to quantum mechanics, what it means. I will now switch gears and tell you a little bit about the historical context of it. You saw the picture, you saw these people, geniuses, to say the least. The first person, actually, who made this fundamental change from classical to quantum thinking was Max Planck. A very interesting character. He was at the time actually the most highly regarded physicist of the time in Europe, in Germany in particular, and got the Nobel Prize in 1918. Maybe the fact that he was highly regarded already helped this new field usher into the scientific mainstream, because, as you know, science is a very conservative field and it's very difficult to change paradigms. This paradigm change occurred very rapidly by anybody's standards. And Max Planck actually reluctantly embraced it because he was trained in classical thinking. And basically, he tried and tried for many years to explain some fairly benign observations, namely the distribution of energy spectra of objects at different temperatures. So every object at some temperature emits electromagnetic radiation. You can measure how much of radiation is emitted at different temperatures and with different frequencies. This radiation has a spectrum, okay? Just like white light has a spectrum of frequencies. And you can measure it precisely. At that time, they were able to do it in physical laboratories, but using classical concepts of a continuum of energies and continuum of frequencies simply could not work. Nobody was able to explain mathematically what was being observed. But in about 1900, Max Planck made a simple empirical assumption: what if? What if there is a frequency, and this frequency defines the energy? So electromagnetic energy is proportional to the frequency of vibrations. Probably all of you know the formula E equals mc squared, Einstein's formula. Everybody is in the popular domain, so to speak. Everybody, but this is probably equally important, if not more important. E equals hf. Who knows E equals hf? You do? Bravo, great. Okay, so that's Planck's formula. But Planck went one step further. Planck's constant, h, frequency f, and he said, yes, but it can be n times hf. That is, you can have 0, no energy, 1, quantum of energy, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. Actually, there's also the 0-point energy 1/2, so it's n plus 1/2 times hf. But we're not being picky today. And then, so he plugged it into the formula for the intensity of light emitted from these objects at different temperature. That's the formula, Planck's radiation law, and it explained beautifully all the observations. And suddenly, it all hinged actually on two assumptions. One assumption being that energy is proportional to frequency. Nobody knew at the time. And the second was that this energy is quantized. It can only be in integer multiples of the basic quantum h times f. H is spelled out down below. It's 6.6261 times 10 to the minus 34th joules times second. And you might ask, where is this? What is this? Where is this coming from? Actually, it's one of those fundamental physical constants that nobody knows where it's coming from. We simply assume it's a fundamental that you cannot explain it by any more fundamental assumption than this. So the speed of light, 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second is another fundamental constant. There are several more. This is the one that Planck needed to explain the spectra, and it came out to be that. It's also found in some other phenomena in physics, and it's always the same number. We don't know why. It's God-given, quote unquote. Whether you believe in God or not, I'm not asking you, but all right. So that was the first experiment. I want you to keep this in mind. Maybe we'll get to the parallel between this first experiment that Planck explained and what's happening today in biology. Because this historical introduction is meant to give you a parallel. Remember, I told you that biology today is somewhat similar to physics maybe a century ago, maybe a bit more, but something like this. I'm not putting down biology, actually the opposite. Biology is much more difficult than physics, to me at least, and it's very complex. So it may take longer for humanity to understand living systems than non-living systems. Okay, the second experiment that changed the world as we know it and gave Albert Einstein a Nobel Prize, not for special relativity, not for E equals mc squared, by the way. He got the Nobel Prize for the explanation of the photoelectric effect. The photoelectric effect is illustrated here. You have a vacuum lamp with 2 electrodes. You have an emitter plate and a collector plate, and you shine light on one of these plates, on the emitter plate, and depending on the frequency of light, not intensity, no matter how bright the beam of light is, you either have an effect or you don't have an effect. It has nothing to do with the intensity of light. It has to do with the frequency of light. And again, the frequency, remember, is related to energy by the Planck formula, E equals hf. So the higher the frequency, the higher the energy. What that means is that the frequency is too low. There will be not enough energy to eject electrons from the plate. If the frequency is just right, some electron will be ejected from the surface of the plate, from the metal, and will be able to be attracted to the other plate, the collector plate. And for every frequency above, the same thing happens. Extra energy can be translated into the kinetic energy of the electrons. They'll be moving faster. But whether they move or they don't move doesn't depend on the intensity. They only depends on the cutoff for the frequency value. All right? So this is, in retrospect, very simple. We use it every day, actually, in photocells, for example, sometimes in alarms that are triggered by cutting the beam of light, laser light, right? They trigger an alarm or things like that, or even in more prosaic situations, you walk into a washroom and suddenly, magically, water starts flowing. All right, that's exactly this effect. And keep this in mind because that's another effect which actually is the first documented and explained quantum biology application today, not the photoelectric effect, but it's parallel. I'll tell you right now what it is. Photosynthesis. It involves the capture of light and transformation of light into biochemical energy. It's a quantum effect. Okay. Here, the quantum, as you see, is the quantum of light, photon. A single photon may trigger and acts almost like a particle. It kicks out an electron because it has energy and momentum and velocity. Okay. Very briefly, these two experiments I want you to remember: the spectrum of black body radiation, which was the first one that Planck explained, and the second, the photoelectric effect, which Einstein explained. Because today we have parallels in biology of these two types of experiments. One already explained, the other, I will tell you, it's on the way. There were other experiments, roughly speaking, 6 or 7 big experiments that convinced the world of physics in early 1900s that quantum mechanics was correct and classical mechanics was not at this level. One disclaimer: it does not mean that you can forget classical physics in building bridges and cars and houses, because at the level of macro scale, quantum mechanics actually transitions smoothly into classical. It does not contradict it. It simply means that the energy scale of quantum processes is so small it becomes irrelevant for most of the macroscopic processes. And that, by the way, is why a lot of people think that it does not apply to biology, because most of biological systems are large enough to ignore quantum effects, right? Well, most, yes, but not all. And we'll come to it. And some of the biological processes we know are very, very subtle, and they depend on a single quantum. And you might be surprised which processes are so subtle that they depend on a single quantum, because we experience them on a daily basis. Okay, this is a list of additional experiments that at the turn of the century, or early 20th century, were conducted and demonstrated the validity of quantum mechanics. The first one is called the Compton effect. It showed that photons can actually hit electrons and get them going almost like billiard balls. So light was demonstrated to behave like a massive particle in collisions with electrons. The second is also very well known to probably all of you: atomic spectra and molecular spectra. That is, you can excite electrons in valence orbitals of atoms and molecules, and then when they come back to the lower orbit, they emit radiation with the frequency that corresponds to the energy difference between the two levels. The double slit experiment I mentioned to you earlier, if you took some physics, even mechanics, or optics in fact, you probably did double slit experiments with light. The same experiments can be done with particles, and patterns are very similar. So that means that electrons and protons and neutrons behave also like waves. The last experiment, the so-called Stern-Gerlach experiment, is very interesting. It shows something completely new that in classical mechanics that didn't exist. Namely, particles like electrons or protons, they were subjected to magnetic fields. And in magnetic fields, they were traveling either curving up or down, depending on what was the value of a new property discovered by Pauli, Wolfgang Pauli, a boy genius from Switzerland. He called it spin. And spin is a completely quantum property. We know that massive objects have velocity, therefore momentum, angular momentum, energy, but in classical mechanics there was no room for spin. Why is this important? Well, we talk about quantum biology and we talk about the applicability of quantum concepts to large scales of systems, right? And a lot of people argue that there is no room for quantum mechanics at room temperatures and for large systems. Actually, it's complete nonsense, because, for example, spin as a quantum property, absolutely quantum property, with no equivalent in classical physics, is a necessary condition for magnetism. And as you probably know, magnetism has been known to humanity for almost as long as we are on this planet. At least known to ancient Greeks and Egyptians. So 3,000 years or more, people were using magnets in compass needles to determine direction in the world, not knowing that actually this is a quantum phenomenon at room temperature to boot. So the arguments against quantum mechanics at large scales fall. This is one example, superfluidity and superconductivity. You may have heard about superconductors. They are used technologically, even these days in something called quantum computing. But these properties are macroscopic properties of physical systems. The problem with temperature is still there, but magnetism demonstrates that temperature may not be an enemy of quantum mechanics. Very briefly now, because so far I told you about sort of historical and philosophical aspects of quantum mechanics, in the next few minutes I will indulge you a little bit in the nuts and bolts of quantum mechanics. What is it really to do quantum mechanical calculations? So quantum mechanics is a completely formal theory. It is based on postulates and representations, and then mathematical calculations follow. So the first postulate of quantum mechanics is that a system, every physical system, exists in a state. So you have to assign a state to the system. A state is defined by a wave function, a mathematical object which has some properties. It has to be square integrable and so on. I don't want to get into technicalities, but you have to forget about assigning position and momentum and mass to a system. You assign a wave function psi or phi. And the second postulate, the wave function actually has a meaning when it's squared. You square the wave function, it gives you...
Hang on, I got a quick question about the last one. Is the relationship between psi 1 and psi 2 necessarily linear?
Okay, good question. It's one of the postulates. It says that, specifically, if a system exists in a state psi 1 and also exists in state psi 2, any linear combination of these two states is an acceptable state. It's a major difference. It means, for example, and this is actually has been a source of debates, arguments, that a quantum system may be here and there at the same time. A quantum system may be up and down at the same time. A quantum system, so this is the kind of almost a joke. The Schrödinger cat, the proverb, can be both dead and alive, because there is a state of being alive and a state of being dead. So a superposition of these two states is, from the point of view of quantum mechanics, completely acceptable. Of course, as I said, it's a bit of a joke, but what's not a joke is that, for example, a system, in quantum system, may be on this side of the wall and the other side of the wall. So a particle may be both ahead of the wall and on the other side. That means it may tunnel, and almost like ghosts. So it's, right? It's beyond mathematical. It's a physical sense. It may, yes. These things happen. Actual tunneling of quantum particles through classically impenetrable obstacles is the basis of semiconductor electronics, semiconductor-based electronics, where basically electrons can go uphill, if you will, i.e. tunnel, into states that are classically forbidden. That's all I can say. Most of it is very paradoxical. It's very counterintuitive, but it has been proven over and over and over again, and it works. So if you think about an electron as a ball, as a ping pong ball or a tennis ball, then it's hard to accept that it can penetrate on the other side of the wall. But if you think about it as a cloud, then maybe it's more acceptable to think about it as being mainly here, but also there. Okay. It's a very good question, though. It's called the superposition principle, that a physical system can be superimposed not in two states. It could be in a million states or infinity of states, in fact. And I have to say that some of these paradoxical statements are a lot of people latch on to them and say, okay, well, this is what biology is doing. Right? This is and they simply focus their attention on the most exotic parts of quantum mechanics, whereas maybe it doesn't have to be so exotic. All right, so the square of the wave function is the probability of the system being somewhere or in a given state. And to answer your question, so you may say that this particle, this electron, is not that it's here and there, but maybe there is 75% probability it's on this side of the wall, 25% probability it's on the other side of the wall. Then maybe it's more palatable to express it in probabilistic terms rather than esoteric is here and there and everywhere. So the third postulate of quantum mechanics is even more difficult to explain without actually mathematical training. It simply says that all physical quantities that we're used to using in measurements can be and should be replaced by mathematical operators, objects, Hermitian operators. So these operators are given here. Position is given by the position operator. Momentum by this p operator, which is a position derivative. Energy is represented by the so-called Hamiltonian operator. And to find out about the energy, for example, the energy of a particle, you operate with the Hamiltonian on the wave function. You formulate the so-called eigenequation, and the eigenvalue of this equation is the energy that the system is expected to have. I mentioned Newton's equations. There are no Newton's equations in quantum mechanics. Newton's equations were replaced by the Schrödinger equation. This is a rather complicated looking partial differential equation, which is basically the statement of the following type. If I have a particle in state psi at time t, what state will it be in at time t plus delta t? So in other words, what is the evolution probability of the system over time? That's the answer to that question is the solution of the Schrödinger equation. In many cases, you can solve it exactly. In most cases, you can't solve it exactly. You have to use computers and numerical approximations. But it's a linear equation. It's a partial differential linear equation. It's solvable, no problem. Incidentally, again, I want to poke fun at granting agencies for research in science and medicine. The Schrödinger equation was postulated, or not really properly derived, but arrived at by Erwin Schrödinger in 1925, I remember, 1926, on his 2-week vacation in the Swiss mountains, okay? So much for working diligently at your desk. He spent 2 weeks in Gstaad skiing and then solving this equation, all right? So one of the greatest achievements of human mind, not a penny, not a Swiss franc paid for it, and not a single grant applied for. Okay, this is the end of the introduction to quantum mechanics. I will now start switching gears to biology. So the first trivial argument for using quantum mechanics in biology, or every actually natural science imaginable, is that everything that we know of reduces to physics because of the composition of matter. So biological matter is not some magical, miraculous matter that is composed of different elementary particles than your desk and chairs. No, it comes from the same atoms: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur, phosphorus, and I missed one. Anyway, and microelements. So the composition itself is physical. Of course, we are begging the question, what is life? And I'm not going to venture into this territory. And what makes living matter alive and what makes it dead at some point? That's a different story altogether. But historically, again, physics, quantum physics actually has made major inroads into other sciences, and chemistry, of course, was the natural expansion ground in the first wave, and of course that happened many decades ago, and there is no disputing quantum nature of chemical bonds, and quantum chemistry is a mature field. In fact, to the point that today quantum chemistry is not even typically represented in chemistry departments as such, is replaced by computational chemistry, because quantum chemistry is so second nature to chemistry that there's no point in calling it quantum anymore. So molecules reduced to atoms. Atoms have nuclei and electrons, and elementary particles reduced to quarks. Why not biological matter? It's simply based off DNA, RNA, proteins, and each of which is composed of amino acids, nucleic acids, and sugars and things like that. So there is really nothing stopping us from thinking about biological matter as physical matter. And I have to say that there's some other logical arguments for it. I normally don't appeal to authority, but the creators of quantum mechanics themselves thought about biology using quantum concepts. So in this particular case, I want to mention that Schrödinger, for example, not only appealed to the use of quantum mechanics in biology, but he wrote an incredible book in 1944 called What is Life? So a Nobel Prize in Physics telling biologists what is life. I highly recommend this book. It's a very short book, maybe 160 pages or so, easy to read, still relevant today after 70 years since it was first published. And the second argument, without deferring to authority, is that we as a human race arrived at this most advanced theory of matter a mere 300 years since we started our exploration in science. Mother Nature is experimenting on a massive scale. Every human life, every animal life is an experiment of sorts, has been experimenting with life for 2 billion years. If we found quantum mechanics to be useful in making things like lasers, by the way, another macroscopic phenomenon that is quantum, laser action, laser beams, we use it nonstop, right, these days, with CD players, computers, and barcode readers and things like that. So if we discovered quantum mechanics after 300 years and have been using it to our advantage for the last few decades, why would Mother Nature not take advantage of something which is so remarkable? It defies explanation if you want to reject it. I want to also play the devil's advocate for a minute only. You know my answer. I do believe in some role of quantum mechanics in biology. I'm not saying that every single thing we do is quantum mechanically driven, that our brains are running like quantum computers. But what I want to say is that not most of it, but some of it may be quantum. Why only some? Well, over the course of our scientific endeavor, we have created disciplines, scientific disciplines. And these disciplines operate almost autonomously. I don't know if you ever explored so-called interdisciplinary science, and we are exploring right now together, right? This is the most difficult concepts and new concepts, and we're still grappling with it. Why is that? Because each discipline, and I've shown you a few examples here, elementary particle physics being at the bottom, the most advanced. I don't want to put anybody down, but really, in terms of time scales and the size scales, the smallest, the tiniest, the shortest time scales take place here in the elementary particle physics domain. Then we have condensed matter physics. I actually started out in condensed matter physics. Condensed matter physics deals with magnets and crystals and solids, semiconductors, and so on. Kind of mundane. And then you have chemistry. Of course, interaction between atoms forming molecules, molecules forming macromolecules, and so on. And biochemistry, specifically the chemistry of biological molecules, biologically relevant. What I want to say is that within each circle, you have two things. The first thing is elements that you play with, your Lego blocks. Elementary particle physics only deals with quarks and nucleons. It doesn't care about anything above it. Higgs boson, the latest toy that you must have heard about, right? Condensed matter physics actually doesn't care about elementary particle physics. For condensed matter physics, the only thing that matters is electrons and protons. Neutrons don't matter. You know, gluons or quarks, they don't matter. And so on. So you have different blocks. So people don't really talk about each other when they cross disciplines easily. But not only blocks, but also rules of the game change, right? At the bottom, you have, in elementary particle physics, you have actually relativistic quantum mechanics, which I didn't talk about. It's a more advanced version of quantum mechanics than the Schrödinger equation. It's called the Dirac equation. You have to observe the laws of special relativity at the same time as the laws of quantum mechanics. But anyway, at the level of condensed matter physics, you do the Schrödinger equation on large systems and all kinds of approximations. In chemistry, you use Hartree-Fock equations, specifically adapted Schrödinger equation to chemistry. In biochemistry, you forget about this altogether, and you deal with thermodynamics or kinetics, chemical kinetics, classical equations. And that's why quantum does not penetrate, because most of the time, you don't encounter any puzzles that cannot be solved outside of the paradigm. So this field, each field develops its own set of rules, its own paradigm. But sometimes, and these yellow lines actually indicate that from the whole field, you end up giving maybe one concept to the next field, one or two, several concepts. And for example, from elementary particles, you only give electrons and protons to the condensed matter physics, and so on. I don't know if you buy into this concept, but I think it's very powerful. I want to add one more thing to it, that it's not only convenient or historically done this way, but it's also, it makes sense from the point of view of a profound mathematical idea, namely the idea of an immense set. How many of you have heard about the immense set? Immense. It's a technical term. It's not your Oxford Dictionary definition. Immense actually means it's a number, 10 to the power 110 specifically. Why is that? Well, an immense number or immense set is a set that cannot ever be even inspected by the largest supercomputer, and this supercomputer could be the entire universe. Because the product of the number of atoms in the universe with the time of the universe counted in picoseconds, which would be the fastest transitions between states, is 10 to the power 110. In other words, if you created a supercomputer that would be the entire universe, every particle being one bit switching on a picosecond timescale, nanosecond is gigahertz transitions, right? Picoseconds is 1,000 times faster. Then in the age of the universe, which is 16 billion years, with this many transitions, you would be able to inspect that set, barely, but nothing beyond. Guess what? Every field in this circle creates an immense set of possibilities. By the way, a game of chess is also an immense set. You cannot possibly exploit or explore all chess games ever. Biochemistry too. The number of DNA sequences is beyond immense. So, all right, that explains to you why fields operate within their own domains, because they create immense sets, and you have to find shortcuts, laws that allow you to do something, some reasoning and generalizations without doing brute force calculations. All right? So back to dimensions of matter at different levels and appropriate fields to explore the consequences. So we have at the bottom again, we start from atoms and quantum physics. Molecules, we still have quantum chemistry. Biomolecules, we enter into a gray zone because they become suddenly too big for quantum mechanics. We actually don't know. Still to this day, we don't know the range of strict applicability of quantum mechanics. Is it 10 molecules? Is it 1,000, 100? Somewhere there. We don't know. Where the quantum turns into classical. So at this mesoscale, we have quantum biology, unfortunately. From biochemistry to cell biology, we enter with players that are in the gray zone between quantum and classical. Some enzymatic reactions, no doubt, involve quantum search algorithms. I mean, people have done calculations trying to figure out how it's possible that some enzymes inside the cell find substrates so rapidly without using seemingly random searches. Random searches can not ever explain this. You have to involve quantum search algorithms. Why is that? Because a quantum wave function, as I told you earlier, spreads out everywhere. So you can more or less explore the entire space simultaneously, not by inspecting every chair. Okay, are you sitting there? No, 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 no. Oh, you're there. This is classical. Quantum is search everywhere at the same time. And once I find somebody I'm looking for, my wave function will be drawn to it by attraction, by the physical attraction forces. So this is, in a sort of hand-waving fashion, a quantum search algorithm. Another example where quantum mechanics may be necessary is, for example, the protein folding problem. You may have heard about the protein folding. Proteins fold from amino acids. Peptide chains built from amino acids. And a protein typically has one so-called native conformation, folds into a globule of a particular shape and size. But if every peptide bond was allowed to explore the possibilities, all the two angles and positions, that would take the age of the universe actually for a moderate-sized protein to fold properly. This is called the Leventhal paradox. It cannot be done by classical random searches. It has to be done by something smarter than this, and a quantum search algorithm is one possibility. Maybe not the only one, but it works. So anyway, we are here, and probably that diagram may be the best diagram of all that I'm going to show you, because it gives you the gist of what I want to say, that some processes at the level of living systems are very likely to be quantum, but maybe not all, because as you translate this into sort of mundane movement of arms and muscles, contraction of muscles and movement of bones, at that point perhaps quantum is really an unnecessary complication. In biochemistry and chemistry, quite often you use the rates of chemical reactions, Ka and Kd, but actually they belie energy, affinity, Gibbs free energy, which is at the top of the scale, delta G, Gibbs free energy of binding. And you can see that for high association, you have a range of kilocalorie per mole energies up to maybe 16. And you may think that this is a very large energy, but actually it's not. So what I'm trying to, and I've given you here a list of typical chemical energies, chemical interaction energies, covalent bonds being the strongest at 90, the weakest being hydrogen bonds at about 0.5 kilocalories per mole. These numbers actually are very quantum-like because they correspond to typical energies of quantum transitions. The photon actually has three 2 to 3 electron volts, which would be weaker than the, well, be stronger than the hydrogen bond, weaker than the covalent bond. Photons can break hydrogen bonds easily. So if photons can cause a photoelectric effect in metals and can break hydrogen bonds in proteins or DNA, why isn't this a quantum world? To me it is, on the basis of simple energy scales. I also want to draw your attention to something called the minimum energy, two properties. The minimum energy and the quantum of biological energy. So the minimum energy in biology is kT. Thermal energy is free, right? Because we live at, what's the temperature? 36.6 Celsius. We maintain, in a normal state, in a healthy state, maintain constant temperature. This temperature provides free, abundant energy to all processes, and kT is actually 0.6 kilocalories per mole. So anything which has an energy lower than 0.6 kilocalories per mole is negligible. It can be simply washed away. All right? So that's the bottom, like the ground state in quantum mechanics. There's nothing below that, really. It doesn't count. On the other hand, there is something in biology which is quantifiable, and it's quantized, in fact, namely biochemical energy. We all use, you're eating, great, a good example, actually. You're ingesting some nutrients, but in the end, you break down, your body will break down glucose, and in your mitochondria, this glucose will produce 36 molecules of ATP. 38? Okay, well, it depends on the source, somewhere in this range. Some people say, but okay. N, remember N, Planck's equation, NHF. ATP has a quantum. In some cases, GTP. So these are the quantum of biological energy. Molecules of ATP or GTP because they hydrolyze to GDP or ADP, releasing phosphate, and energy. And this energy you can't read in red, and I can't read either. But it's a nice number, physicist number. Easy to remember, 10 to the power minus 20 joules. This is the quantum of biological energy. And universal, right? Because we need ATP, we need mainly ATP, but also GTP. 10 to the minus 20th is this pack of energy that you multiply and use it for all other processes. A lengthy introduction into, if you go to Wikipedia and look for quantum biology or quantum mechanics and life, actually you'll mainly find references to these exotic things that actually I try to de-emphasize because it's not necessary to understand quantum mechanics or even use it. But these are the things. Superposition, we talked about it. A particle may be in two states at the same time. In other words, you can also have a receptor molecule, could be, or ligand in a receptor position, could be activated or deactivated, could be in an off and on position at the same time. I think in biology, we want to make decisions, yes or no. Not so much yes and no at the same time. It doesn't do any good if you're hesitant for too long. Somebody will come along and eat you up. So superposition, we talked about this, that's one of those exotic things. Non-locality, that means that, and maybe here we can relate a little bit to non-locality. Maybe some of you have had experiences of various nature. So non-locality in physics means that particles which are even infinitely far apart may feel each other. There were experiments on and particles which were constructed to have a net zero spin, spin up and spin down, and then they flew apart, and they still, you detect one far away, miles and miles away, and you measure the spin, the other one will show up with the opposite spin, as if it knew what you did to the partner. So this is bizarre. It's almost like telepathy or something like that, right? I don't know if you experienced telepathy or not, I have, but doesn't matter. We can relate to this a little bit. Maybe at some level, our subtle intuitive forces of the mind operate at quantum levels. So entanglement means that there is no particle is alone in the universe. All particles, no matter how far apart, they still interact by quantum physical forces. So that can be good and that can be bad because, in other words, noises that you want to shield from some of the particles that are of importance to you can never be completely shielded because the particles are entangled with the environment. And tunneling, we talked about tunneling a lot. This is bizarre, but people like it. I think we use it, and that's about it. Okay, this is a long list of doubts in quantum biology. And I'm going to very quickly go through the list, and I'm sure you have similar doubts. First of all, living systems are big compared to physical systems. A cell has many atoms. I'm trying to remember the number. I don't know. I'm not going to guess the number. 10 to some large power of atoms. Living systems are relatively hot compared to physical systems. 36.6 Celsius, 310 Kelvin or something like this is very large. Physical experiments typically occur at very low temperatures to maintain precision and avoid thermal noise. Most importantly, living systems need water. Most of the living system is actually water. So this is all in a wet environment, and most of physics is done in dry environments. There is, of course, fluid mechanics, but quantum mechanics in fluids is something that I don't even know if I read anywhere. There may be quantum fluids, but it's something really even more exotic than any of those things that I talked to you about before. Another thing is time scales. You know, in physics, quantum mechanics, the time scales, speaking of time, I think I have 7 minutes. We have a second lecture, so I'm not worried. I'll stop at any moment. But time scales, very important. In terms of quantum mechanics, the time scales are somewhere femtoseconds, 10 to the minus 15th, maybe to picoseconds, 10 to the minus 12th. Nanoseconds would be very slow. In biology, a nanoseconds is only the beginning of things to happen. Typically, proteins, you probably are familiar with protein folding, with protein conformational changes. Proteins change conformations. These changes occur at least on a microsecond scale, 10 to the minus 6. So we are still 1,000 times slower than physical quantum processes. But, okay, it's still a bit of a gap. It doesn't mean that quantum mechanics cannot bridge these scales. It simply means that historically we've been looking at different corners of the time axis. Complexity is a big deal for living systems. Living systems are very complex, and for a reason. Every molecule in a cell plays a certain role. Whether it's a structural protein, or it's a functional protein, or it's a motor protein, or it's an ion channel, they do a particular job, and they do it for a reason and very efficiently. In physics, we usually have repetitions of the same group, like in crystals or individual particles. So there is a big chasm between these two approaches. I'm not saying, again, that it disqualifies quantum mechanics simply because of complexity. It's just we are not used to this kind of complexity dealing with quantum systems. But at the last sentence at the bottom says, nature is the nanotech master, so it may have pushed the limits of quantum mechanics to both longer time scales, more complex systems, bigger systems, and also warm and humid systems compared to physical. But what I want to say is that quantum mechanics may come in very handy to explain some of the mysteries. We still have lots of mysteries about living systems. First of all, as you probably know, life is a non-equilibrium system. We need nutrients. We need to be constantly provided external energy to sustain life. Secondly, there is some sort of mysterious synchronization of many, many processes taking place at the same time throughout the body at different time scales and different spatial dimensions. There's no denying that you are one person from top to bottom. You can move your arms and walk and talk at the same time, and all of this requires different processes. So this is, in physics, quite often referred to as long-range correlations. We are correlated on a long range, because 1 meter or 2 meters is a very long range compared to physical systems where you operate on angstroms to nanometer scale, and correlations may disappear. And also, it's a self-organizing system. So self-organization means nobody is following any blueprint, design principles, let's do this. Things occur spontaneously for a reason, and that is very difficult to explain mechanistically with kind of classical concepts. Okay, I think I'll wrap it up just by saying that there were many attempts at introducing quantum physics into biology over the past 50 years. They focus on different aspects, some on enzymatic catalysis, some on biophotons. We emit photons. This is maybe a topic for another lecture next year. Biophotons for detection of diseases and things of this nature. People who are sick have a different spectrum of biophotons that we emit, radiation, thermal, infrared. You can detect it and you can diagnose. It's very interesting stuff. It's also related to quantum transitions. Another was incredibly efficient energy transfer in biological systems. In spite of all this complexity, our cells are almost 100% efficient. They compare very favorably to machines and human-made machinery. There are, of course, special proteins called motor proteins which perform these tasks. They move cargo from place to place, and they operate at close to 100% efficiency. It's amazing how it works. So Alexander Davidov was a Russian physicist in the 70s to 90s, and in the last 2 decades of his life, actually, he devoted his attention to bioenergetics, trying to explain how biological systems efficiently transfer energy, and he used quantum concepts, eventually translated into things called solitons, waves which are maintaining their profile and they don't dissipate energy on the way. And another important name in this connection is Herbert Fröhlich. He was a German-British scientist, physicist who actually missed a Nobel Prize by a whisker. He should have got a Nobel Prize for superconductivity. He developed the fundamental concepts behind superconductors before anybody else, but for whatever reason he didn't get it. So again, in his last 20 years, he focused on long-range coherence and postulated the biological systems maintain their organization or maintain synchrony through high-frequency oscillations in their dipole arrangements. And that is how they communicate. And now, he died in 1991. I was actually at a conference in Phoenix, Arizona. He was supposed to be the keynote speaker during the first Iraq War, Desert Storm. And I think it was January 16th or something. And he passed away that day. He couldn't come. So 25 years ago, he was promoting these ideas. Today, we are still trying to understand and document how that is performed at the level of molecules. I will stop at this point. Maybe I'll let you ask some questions, and we'll continue on Thursday with even more esoteric, less physics, more biology. So maybe that's the good news. Thank you.
I think this shows the way in which we sort of go for the most essential basics in this course.
Maybe I can ask you a question, because as a physicist, I find biology incredibly fascinating, and the human body in particular, it's a marvel. So I ask you, what in particular, if you have the same feeling about the biology and the human body, do you have any particular aspect of our living processes that you find incredible to comprehend? You have one thing that you say, how does it work? How do we do this? How is it possible that we can, parallel process, or whatever? I'm not giving you ideas, but do you have anything? Yes, please.
So the human brain just having 100 billion neurons and trillions of connections among them is just an incredible marvel, and how we actually perform even the very basic functions is just beyond, it's mind-blowing. But one, not question, but one thing that made me wonder was when you were talking about biological systems as opposed to quantum mechanics, you were saying the time scale in quantum mechanics is in nanoseconds, whereas protein folding and a lot of biological processes take a lot of time in seconds. But we typically consider the brain to be one of the fastest organs, and yet the processing time is in milliseconds.
Yes.
And even in terms of efficiency of the body, the human muscle it has the most efficient body to power ratio than as compared to any other human-made machine. But all of these things don't really, like the brain and the muscle, don't really correspond to the quantum mechanics aspect, with having larger time scale, and yet still quantum mechanics seems to be very, sorry, this is getting really long, but
I think very insightful comments. I want to say, I was thinking about the same thing, and I will talk about this actually on Thursday, the brain in particular. To add or amplify your sense of wonderment, the human brain is, let's say, comparable to the best supercomputer. You must have followed the IBM's Blue Gene, the Kasparov chess match with the Blue Gene and the Jeopardy, right? So the computer won in the end, but it's comparable, okay? It's not that we're destroyed completely. So our human brain is comparable to a supercomputer. A supercomputer consumes a megawatt of energy, of power consumption. So it's 10 to the 6 joules per second. The human brain consumes about 25 watts, less than a bulb, okay? And for process, most of it actually is just to maintain the heat, the temperature of the brain, and also protein synthesis. Maybe 1% of it is for information processing. So it's less than 1 watt. It's 1,000,000 times more efficient than the best supercomputer on this planet. That to me is incredible, right? So somewhere these quantum efficiencies may kick in. I don't know exactly where, but maybe on Thursday I will tell you where I think they are.
So based on that then, so if we are capable of utilizing more than 1%, then what? Do we just increase the amount of power our brain is capable of performing, or performance in general?
Well, it's a good question. I don't know where actually the wastage is. We do have an inherent limitation in terms of delivering the amount of energy to the brain. You cannot probably deliver much more than you do already. And we must maintain the temperature, otherwise this will collapse in terms of processes. But if we can multiply it by a factor of 10, our own efficiency maybe will be like Albert Einstein or Erwin Schrödinger. I don't know. So I don't know where this will. The question is, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, pathological disorders like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and even psychiatric diseases. I'll try to mention something about this on Thursday, where I think quantum may be harnessed in terms of therapeutic aspects or preventative. Okay? Well, thank you for your attention.
Okay, great, thank you. Great session.